This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone in a Carl Tatz designed room through the Spectra 1964 STX 600 mic pre-complimenter and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
Where music is going today, you might have a chord progression with a 1 chord, a 6 chord, a 4, and a 5. Yeah, they might sing a hook on a chorus, but they also might sort of have more just static rap thing happening and like on a verse. Then a lot of the things that are making that song happen are the parts coming in and out that aren't necessarily parts of those equations.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. I used to have an expensive pop filter for my vocal mic that was so fragile, I had to put a sign on it warning singers not to touch it or else the thing would break. But not anymore. Now I've got this super durable pop filter from jzmic.com that sounds fantastic. I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and can focus on making music. Go ahead, grab my pop filter. I dare you. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS and get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Howdy, Rockstar. Are you ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound professional no matter what your studio situation? Then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get pro-sounding mixes in your DAW using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR for 10% off for a limited time. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record with confidence over USB-C with up to more than a gigabyte per second of real-world performance. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the Envoy Pro Electron and all your OWC storage needs at maxsales.com/rockstars. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Wes Little, one of Nashville's most adaptable and multifaceted drummers, as well as a top-flight arranger, producer, and songwriter. Wes was trained in performance and composition at the Manhattan School of Music and shaped by years of studio and stage work with major acts. Currently a first-call session drummer in Nashville, Wes has also performed or recorded with artists like Chuck D, Stevie Wonder, Sting, Tyler of Aerosmith, John Legend, Melissa Etheridge, Robben Ford, Michael and Randy Brecker, Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, to name just a few. And he works in Nashville, where he also lives and records daily in his studio. So we're going to be talking about that for sure. Some of Wes's credits include artists like Christopher Cross, Trey Anastasio, Little River Band, Larry Carlton, Alicia Keys, Beyonce, John Legend, Melissa Etheridge. I mean, the list goes on. Paul Schaefer, Dierks Bentley, Winona Judd, Emmylou Harris, the Pointer Sisters. Just an awesome list of people that he's worked with, as well as his own band, The Big Greasy. Am I saying that right? The Big Greasy?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. On another note, Wes also played on Broadway, and I'm going to quote you here, Wes, from your own bio. I've made whip crack sounds for John Lithgow in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. I have played quite possibly the largest setup in the world of drums and percussion in the show BKLYN, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I acted the part of a drummer. I love that. I acted the part of a drummer that couldn't speak in the show Once Around the Sun. Isn't that true of all drummers? Just kidding.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Do we get to make drum jokes?
Oh, yeah. Let's see how many we know.
All right. I've probably only got like one good one. And it involves whether or not the drum riser is level.
Oh, yeah. The drool one.
Yeah, the drool one, because the drool comes out of both sides of the drummer's mouth. Wes also played in a big band on stage for 3 months in a show called Rat Pack Live at the Sands. So was that in Vegas?
Actually, it was strange, man. It was a British, actually, I don't think they like that term, an English,
I didn't know the British didn't like being called the British.
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but it was from the UK, and they were coming over to do an American tour of this show that they had done on the West End there, which is sort of like their Broadway in London. And their drummer, as long as we're on drummer jokes, had they call it a drink drive offense. So he couldn't get a passport. So they called me literally like 3 days before the show. And I ended up touring. This was probably about 10 or 15 years ago. I ended up touring with this English company all around the United States, playing the actual arrangements of the Sinatra, Sammy Davis, the Rat Pack, the whole thing, Dean Martin, in a show that had been constructed from the original arrangements, like Nelson Riddle and all those folks. But they also had taken the dialogue from the tapes that they had of those shows from the Sands. So it was kind of cool. It was an actual big band on stage playing these songs in the way they were played with the dialogue that was, I guess, spoken real time in the show. So it's pretty great. It's pretty fun to do.
Nice. Well, that's groovy, man. That's pretty cool. And I learned something new. So I will now talk to my English friends as English.
Well, don't quote me on that, but I don't know.
Hey, man, I mean, we're already live on the podcast. There's no take backs, right?
Exactly.
So also, Rockstars, a shout out to our mutual friend, Smith Curry, who's been on the show too, for kind of making our introduction and reminding me to invite Wes on the show. But of course, Wes and I already know each other because Wes was part of the massive effort we had in 2020 to save home studios in Music City. So please welcome Wes Little to Recording Studio Rockstars. Wes, are you ready to rock, dude?
Always, Lidge, always. Thank you. And thanks to Smith Curry. And obviously, thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, our pleasure, man. My pleasure. Great to hang out with you. It was really fun listening to all the music you've been doing too. Rockstars, of course, we got a playlist together in the show notes. You can scroll down and we've got, Spotify playlists. I got a YouTube playlist and you can check out Wes playing drums on all kinds of stuff. Why don't we just start it? Let's start with your reel, dude. I mean, there's this video of you playing with Barack and Michelle Obama dancing, and it looks like pretty over the top. So what was that gig for you? And tell us about that story.
That was probably, and this is obviously where some of my credits come from. Although I've worked with different artists in different situations, but when I lived in New York prior to moving to Nashville, and that's where I did the Broadway stuff. But I also got to know Ray Chu and did some work with him in New York. And a buddy of mine, Russell Graham, who's now touring and producing Nile Rodgers, we knew each other. So he sort of got me in with Ray. And Ray's done, now he's doing Dancing with the Stars, although I'm sure the pandemic has had a effect on that in terms of taping. But he also did American Idol. But this was all prior to that. In 2008, we did the DNC convention, Democratic National Convention in Denver. And it was cool because we just were sort of like a house band, to play bumpers going on and off.
This was back in 1968 when it got really exciting.
Exactly. Well, 2008. I guess things got exciting in the housing market that year. But yeah, so they really liked the band. So when the inauguration came along in 2009, when Barack won the presidency, President Obama, they wanted the same band to play. So basically that was like a career in an evening in terms of playing with artists, and it was crazy because, we basically rehearsed all the songs the day before for this, really dais of artists, Beyonce, Sting, Shakira, Alicia Keys,
Amazing.
and the list just went on. So it was an opportunity, and it was on live TV. That's why there was a video of it. But it was an opportunity to sort of play with a lot of my heroes, quite frankly. Stevie Wonder certainly was a highlight because I've been listening to his music forever. And we play a lot of that in the band, The Big Greasy.
And when you're doing a Stevie Wonder song, are you most likely imitating Stevie himself playing the drum part, the original part?
I did, when we played like Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I did sort of an amalgam of what I normally do and then sort of what Stevie did.
Right, but I mean, like, did Stevie had other drummers in the studio, or was he almost always playing himself and building it?
It depends. Like, I can't remember who's on that track, but I know it's not Stevie. But a lot of that early stuff that I love, like I Wish, Master Blaster, all those earlier recordings, it is Stevie Wonder playing drums.
Nice.
So, it was a high bar. And the funny thing is we ended up playing Spain and sort of just joking around Chick Corea, Spain.
Wow.
In the sound check, and then he did a song with Sting that night called All About the Love. And, they sort of duetted together. So it was just a great opportunity for me to, play with all these different artists, in one night.
Yeah.
And like even Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, like from the Nashville contingent, were there. And I think they had their own band, but we played with them some towards the end of the night. And then, of course, I ended up doing a record with them here in Nashville 8 years later. So it was just a great opportunity, and certainly one of the highlights of my musical endeavors and career.
Yeah. So you show up, you've got a day to rehearse. What's the stuff that, what do you go through to pull something like that off? I mean, what are the basics of doing that the right way?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a right way, and then I'm sure there's a way it just ends up being.
Right.
That's not blaming anyone. It's basically just acknowledging that the artist may change their minds. They may change what songs they want to do at the last minute. And when you've got, 15 or so, it can really end up being, you just have to be very quick on your feet.
Yeah. So is it all head charts, or is there a way that you can do quick notation on stuff?
Some of that, they did have a chart system. I think maybe they actually had paper charts, or maybe we also used these. It was sort of like an iPad, but it was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a musical, music notation sort of screen. And I think the conductor could change it or advance it. I know that's what we had at the DNC, and they had used that on some other TV show. But for this, we would have charts, and we would get, we would rehearse amongst ourselves the day before, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes to a half hour for each song that we were thinking we were going to do. And then we had 30 minutes with each artist. So like Mariah Carey was also on that night. And I remember she had a click that was tempo mapped for her song Hero. So, I had to like make sure I really stayed with the click for the Rolling Tondo there at the end. And
Yeah.
it just, stuff like that where, if you're recording it like on a session, that's one thing where you can go back, but when it's live TV, it's a pressure. It's a
Yeah.
pressure.
Yeah. You're just
So
trying to get it right. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been so impressed with people playing live events, although I've probably seen it in a much more rehearsed situation, like, a musical or something like that, where you get a lot of chance to learn the part.
yeah, I mean, in an like when you're preparing for a tour or like musicals, certainly we would rehearse unless you're coming in subbing, which is actually where I played the whip cracks for John Lithgow. That's another story.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, typically you would have a little more time to get it together, but luckily I read pretty well and can adapt pretty quickly. So that's probably why I got called for those types of gigs.
Well, let me
Y-
ask you this question about that. I'm sort of jumping forward a little bit. Reading, being good at reading. What are you reading? Are you reading things that look like notes with X's on them, like I sort of remember from band? Or are you reading charts that are more like outline charts? Like what makes it good for you as a drummer to be able to read a thing and know what you're supposed to do?
Well, I mean, it varies. Typically, as in Nashville, we obviously use the Nashville number system, and that's our charting system that's predominant. Then we have like a standard notation lead sheet kind of chart. And that's typically what I'll get in these situations. I won't actually have drum notation, which is what I think you're referring to with the
Yeah.
X's,
Yeah.
and it's great to have drum notation, but honestly, sometimes that's so much information. I would rather have just the lead sheet and be able to make my own choices
Yeah.
about, you know, what's coming up rather than trying to read it. That being said, I can read standard notation, and certainly Broadway or like that Rat Pack show, any of those would have been standard drum parts written out. So
Right.
there's sort of, for me in reading charts, there are sort of four different areas. One is the standard notation lead sheet. One is like a Nashville numbers kind of chart. Another would be the standard drum notation, which is rare, but it does happen. Not really in Nashville, but I, certainly see it on those kind of musical TV show kind of things that can happen.
What
And
does a lead sheet look like? Is it sort of like the lead melody with chord changes written on
yeah, or it might just be
staff
chord
paper?
changes. It might just be the bass part. It's something to give me as a drummer, a rhythm section player, an idea of what's going on. And it would be sort of akin to like a real book chart.
Hmm.
That would sort of be what that would be. So you'd have a melody and chord changes, and at least you get the form. You know where things are happening, where sections begin and end. And my fourth actually way of reading is my own drummer shorthand, which is just sort of a quick method I have for making sure I understand where the sections of the song are, and I'll put like a sample groove and any kind of hits that I have to notate. So that's also a way of. So those are sort of my four ways of reading, and thankfully, I don't recommend school for everything in music, even if you go to music school. But that is a skill I'm glad that I got from school.
Yeah, and that was at Manhattan School of Music.
Yeah, I went there. I originally had aspirations of becoming a jazz drummer, but that's not all I wanted to do. I've obviously had a love for a lot of other music, rock, R&B, funk, and pop. So I think it was good for me to sort of cover this area where I was a little weaker in my playing, which is at the time was sort of the jazz end of things. And then that set me up to be able to play with people like Robben Ford and Larry Carlton and other people
Yeah,
that are,
amazing.
yeah.
And you
So,
mentioned Chick Corea, and of course our interview is happening when he has recently passed.
oh,
Um,
sure. Yeah.
and there's some incredible videos I was finding on YouTube of him playing with doing the trio thing. I think was that Vinny Colaiuta he would have played with?
Man, he played with a lot of different people, but I'm sure he did some with Vinny.
Yeah.
And Vinny has obviously been a great inspiration and one of my favorite drummers.
And he was like, he would light a cigarette and just like smoke a cigarette and dangling out of his mouth during the whole
That sounds
song.
like Vinny Colaiuta. Yeah. So I mean, Vinny would have been one of the guys. I mean, like early on, Chick would play with like Roy Haynes. And then of course he had different drummers coming up through the ages. And then, I think toward the late 80s, early 90s, he had all those incarnations of the electric band and the acoustic band. But he certainly, had an amazing career and a huge volume of work. And, just beautiful music,
And I think John Patitucci maybe was playing bass on that
yeah,
section. If that
he
sounds
played with Vinny, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that would have been something. And then of course Patitucci played with Chick with both those electric and acoustic bands.
Yeah, totally. I think he played both in the video I watched. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at spectra1964.com. With so many fantastic iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all the iZotope plugins through their new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. You came down to Nashville. Maybe we'll rewind a little bit and give us a little bit of a, give us the brief story of like how you got interested in music and sort of landed in Nashville. And then, do you find yourself fulfilling your love for jazz still, since you've sort of cast a wider net in music?
Well, it's interesting. I'm from North Carolina, a very small town in North Carolina, and I went to East Carolina University, which was a state-supported school, and I wanted to be in music. So I went as a music major, and I was very lucky at the time to be able to play. The jazz instructor that came in my second year at ECU was is a really amazing bass player. He played with like Ray Charles and Maceo Parker, and some different tours here and there, but he was teaching at the school for the rest of the time that I was there. So I just got a lot of, amazing wisdom, and obviously very influenced by him. His name was Carol Dashiell. And I also had really good percussion teachers, but he was sort of keeping me in that sort of jazz. He just sort of brought that into my spectrum of knowledge that I really hadn't had. And, he was saying, you got to move to New York, and, looking back on it, I probably could have moved to New York and not gone to school. But I think considering the small town I was from, I think the city might have just eaten me alive had I not had a couple of years of schooling.
Yeah.
And I was able to get a master's degree from that. And that's not something I really, it's not like I wear that like a badge or a medal around town, because some people can have adverse reaction to school, which I understand. I understand being in both worlds, how that happens and why. But I will say that, it was a good way for me to sort of ease into the city, although the student loans are just, crazy.
Yeah, I'll bet, man. I'll bet.
So, I mean, I felt really, I think it was I look at New York, the years that I was there, as sort of like another college, you know. It was a time to learn a lot of stuff and be pushed and explore a lot of things, and then kind of hone in on what, I wanted to do. Um, and in New York, I got to play in a couple bands with Chuck D of Public Enemy.
That's so awesome, man.
Yeah, it was cool.
That's great.
But
and were you a hip hop fan before all that, or was this kind of just new discovery for you in New York?
It's sort of both, But I think an element of my playing has always been about a groove,
Yeah.
So I think, that's landed me in a lot of different scenarios. But I think, the jazz scene in New York, I realized that it was going to be very difficult to have a working career. I mean, a lot of people I went to school with, even some that were playing, have not continued to pursue a career in music,
Yeah, my brother's in Brooklyn, and so I've been familiar with the scene through him,
Right. And honestly, it's changed a lot. New York in itself has, it used to be this really, at least when I was there was a lot of jazz and a lot of things going on. And then those places started shutting down.
Like Smalls and places like
Smalls, there used to be different places I would see jazz players play. Luckily, the Village Vanguard is still there. But even if you wanted to go to the Blue Note, it would just cost so much money.
Right.
So typically when I was there in school, I would just try to sit at the bar and kind of, crane my neck over and try to see what was happening.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a great experience, but I think I realized that, I wanted to be doing more sessions and recording and just having a different kind of experience within music. And although I still have a lot of love for jazz and still enjoy playing it, that's been more of like just something I kind of do more as a fun outlet in music, and I think it's good to have that spirit for just pushing yourself and, creativity in general.
Yeah, I love just sort of rediscovering it all the time because I grew up loving jazz. I would listen to it. There was a station called, or the show was called Eric in the Evening on the radio in Massachusetts, and so I'd listen and do my homework and hear that and just get introduced to all this great music.
Yeah,
and so I was really paying attention to a certain point, and then like you, I really focused on songs and song production in studios in Nashville for 20 years, 30 years. And it feels like revisiting those roots, but I'm just a super fan of jazz.
Yeah, man. Well, it's such a beautiful art form, and it's truly an American art form,
Yeah.
So I think, a lot of people, and I try to separate a jazz thing from because I do cover a lot of styles and do a lot of different things. I try to really, and this was something my undergrad teacher pushed on me, was, really understanding the style and getting into the mechanics of it and what makes it work. And so I've tried to apply that to different things that I've done. Like last year, when the Super Bowl was in Miami, I was sort of musical director for a Latin, all-star Latin band. And, so I had to sort of take on the role of a timbalero and what that person would do in an ensemble, with horns and stuff.
And have you had a chance to meet, do you know Tony Sukar?
I don't.
He was recently on the podcast, and he is the Latin Grammy winner, I believe, producer of the year. I think that was right.
Oh, beautiful.
Apologies to you, Tony, if I misquoted that. But anyway, I'm sure you guys would dig meeting and talking about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I had some people that I knew down there. Some of them had been horns in the Miami Sound Machine, and then I bought a couple of guys from Nashville, So I guess what I'm saying is I've tried to figure out a way to sort of categorize these different styles and know when to pull from them, but do it at the right time and in a tasteful way, hopefully.
Yeah, that's super fun. I mean, and I don't know if you'll ever get to play on a Mr. Bungle or something like that, where you can just use all of them all in the same song, but that might be cool too.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Well, so you have a studio now in Nashville, right? Tell us about your studio space. Are you set up to record yourself there if you want to? And tell us why 2020 was important when it came to home studios.
Oh, exactly. Well, yes, I have my wife and I were living in Sylvan Park, and that was my sort of quote unquote third studio. I had one in Brooklyn. It was in a basement. It was, all the things you would expect of being in the basement of an apartment building that I had built. It was sort of like my own version of a whisper room, but It only had 6-foot clearance. It was very heavy. It was put together with casket locks, but as you know, in New York, that's a good deal.
Right. So you assembled, a dead room space, like a sound booth that would just fit the drums in it, so that you could play in there. What let's stay on that topic for just one sec. What were some of the considerations that make a good drum booth for like that sort of scenario?
Well, honestly, that really wasn't a good thing.
Okay.
I mean, it was great for what I had to work with. Basically, I had about 8 feet of clearance, and I needed to be theft proof.
Right.
And I didn't want to spend, $20,000 for a whisper room that you could just go in anyway. So I used several different layers of like sound deadening board, plywood, and at the time it was much like the RLX sheet block. It was some version of that prior to it, but I used that and some sheetrock, and I just sort of sandwiched it all together in this panel that would be on a 2x4 frame.
Right, and that was for the purpose of preventing the drums from leaving your little space into somebody's apartment. Right.
And I didn't want the people in the apartment building to know I was building something like that days on end.
Oh my goodness.
So I built it in North Carolina before I moved to New York, and then brought it up on U-Haul trucks, which was crazy.
Funny enough, I'm pretty sure these are all the reasons why when Whisper Room was a sponsor on the podcast, all the reasons why I would say, or you could just get a Whisper Room.
Exactly. No, Whisper Room would have been ideal. Unfortunately, my budget wouldn't allow for it. They're beautiful in the size that I needed. So this was a 16x12 room.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing about it was it had to be theft proof, because they're actually my buddy, who was also in the same apartment building, had his little drum room in the next room, and somebody one night just ripped through the sheetrock in his room and was stealing stuff.
Whoa, just went right through the wall.
Just went right through the wall.
Holy shit.
And like had just popped the lock off the door. So, I mean, it was, we were paying the basically hush money, superintendent of the building, who was, this sort of horse trading type of guy. And, we would pay him $150 a month to have this room, which we, and he would just it was just sort of like hush money. And he would,
right, because you said it was in the basement space.
Right.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But I had a quote unquote studio, or I had a room in the basement of the apartment building in which I lived.
Right.
Which was great. And, this was in Brooklyn. It was sort of way out in Brooklyn. So that was sort of the first studio, but it wasn't ideal. It was very low ceilings, and the floor had to be built up.
So it wasn't for recording so much as rehearsing.
It was for rehearsing and practicing, but I ended up to start doing some things there. That was sort of what got me into it.
Okay.
I ended up starting to use like an ADAT machine or whatever. I would get something that was like that I would borrow, or it had been somebody's hand me down. And then eventually I got like a little Mackie mixer, and then eventually I just kept going. Then I got into, the digital end of things, and, interfaces and whatnot.
Now, do you remember discovering that in a small closed space like that without bass trapping, that there would be a lot of bass buildup on your drum sound? Or did you have ways to address that at all? Or was that not really an issue for you?
It wasn't as much an issue in that room, I think, just because there was so much stuff in it. It was like I had another drum kit that was in these, and maybe to some degree, it was never designed to be a recording space. And because I wasn't really using room mics, it was all just sort of like, contact mics on each of the drums. And then, like, I think it was just even like some cheap condensers I had as overheads,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what that did do is it sort of set me on the path. So by the time I moved down to Nashville, and it was interesting too, because when I first moved to New York, I split up from my ex-wife, and then I met my current wife, but she moved down to Nashville, and we like dated and were even married a while when we were in two different cities. So after a while, even though I'd had these things going, with different bands I had been in New York, like with Chuck D, or, got to know people like Ray Chew, it just was like, what am I doing here? I should go down to Nashville and just try to actually go where the studios are and have my own place. And we did that for a while in this house in Sylvan Park, but it was a 1,400 square foot house. So by the time you had a control room and a drum room or whatever, it just, it was impossible. So in 2014, we found this house here in Donaldson where they had a guy had lived in the house, and he built a mechanic's garage onto the back of it. So it was like a 27 by 25 foot room, cinder block, with 17-foot ceiling.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring his PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It was like listening to three-dimensional sound with rock-solid bass all the way down to 20 hertz. It was really incredible. What's amazing is that a Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room or even bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound for mixing. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. How important is a tall ceiling for drum sounds?
To me, it is very important. I think, and I've said this to quite a few folks, when being interviewed, I really believe that for me, the room is the instrument, as much as the drums are the instrument. And obviously you can treat a room in different ways and get different sounds. And that's really where the character of the drum sound happens,
Yeah, I'll even give it a shout out to my intern, Nate Horn, who asked that question. He wanted to know, he wanted me to ask you about things like tuning drums and tuning a drum for the room, which it sounds like you're starting to get on that topic right now.
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously hear it in certain rooms when something's kind of out and when something's in. What I try to do is just get a good live sound in a room that's treated. And you can always use gobos and stuff to bring the sound down.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, because and this sort of goes to your 2020 question, but I'm certainly can do full sessions here. I've got like technically 2 dedicated ISO booths, but there are 2 more that can be used. And I have a little piano booth.
Nice.
With a C7, and there's an organ here. But in the live room, there's still roughly an 18 by 25 foot room with 14-foot ceilings that allows this sort of bigger live sound to happen.
Yeah, I mean, listening to your playing in the play, in our playlist of the music you've done, there's definitely you are somebody who knows how to make a snare speak, sort of like it
Thank
fills
you.
up the space in a nice way. And I imagine, that's I don't even imagine, I know from my own experience that's something that you need to have space to do it because that sound comes from the snare in a space.
Exactly. And I mean, and that's something that drummers, they have to learn to play to the room. And one thing that I've learned is, yeah, it's great to play hard and it's cool and it looks cool. Um, but
And it helps if
sometimes,
you're on a really loud stage.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, but when you're recording, there's a little bit of a, you have to play to the room and you have to know when you're overplaying the room, you know,
Yeah.
uh, and you're trying to get the sound in the space you're in. So for me, that was one thing. I just wanted a really nice live room where I could get nice live drum sounds. Um, and we all know that people use trigger and they use sampling and they can sound replace. And I'm certainly within the pop end of things. That's and pop country or country thing. That happens a lot.
Hmm.
I will say though that my goal was just to still try to get the best organic sound that I could, and it's been good to have like that, um, especially for the more jazz kind of recordings that I've done here.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
mean, listening to your discography, there's definitely a cross section of stuff. So there's stuff that sounds like pop production, where again those triggers might be just the right color for for a record. But then there's you're playing on stuff like the Robben Ford records. Like it's all about how you're playing that kit and getting a cool tone out of it.
exactly. And now I have to issue a disclaimer. I've definitely done some records here that have been cool and get out there. But a lot of those records were done obviously in Nashville studios,
Hmm.
um, with, obviously name engineers. I think Julian King um, did a lot of the stuff we did for the Big Machine, which would have been Peyton Smith, I think I put on there, and Callista Clark. Um, and then for Robin's record, there were a couple of different engineers, but one, when we were in Sound Emporium, we were actually in Studio B when Alabama Shakes were over in Studio A.
Ah, cool.
And uh, but that engineer was Nico Bolas. I don't know if you know him.
I know I've met Nico briefly many years ago, and I'm way overdue to have him on the show.
Oh yeah, he's great, man. I love him. But he's sort of he did all that for the tracking of that particular record. And so some of those tracks I put on the Robin record just to show a contrast in those sounds. Um, because for that record, Robin wanted a little more lo-fi sound, I think.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that just watching all these guys work, it's enabled me to sort of, from my mic pre's to my mics to, how I'm approaching miking techniques, from just watching these engineers by being in the studio, it's helped me tremendously in my studio, which strangely enough is called Coupe de Ville. Um, uh, my wife has a couple of chickens, and Robin was over here one day doing some overdubs. He said, "You should call this Coupe de Ville." So I was like, you know what? That's pretty funny. So I
Nice.
did.
That's good.
Uh, but you know, it it's it's been initially I just wanted a really great room where I could get some really great drum sounds and wasn't thinking about, trying to be able to get full bands in or whatever. But then I realized, especially after talking to some friends, most of the work is done by the time you get the live room for the drums. So you might as well just finish out a couple other things.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit more about, what physically, what's your room like? I mean, you talked about it having a 17-foot ceiling, but like what surfaces did you put on the walls? Is it hardwood? Is it soft stuff? Is it like, what are the things that made sense to you to get that kind of sound?
Well, I was very lucky that a buddy of mine knew the president of Orlex. And when they were here for NAMM, he sort of came over and he looked at the room and he said, well, here's what I think you should do. And I was originally going to go with Orlex, but of course that's the last thing to go up. So, budget starts to, play into consideration.
I thought drummers were rich, man. What happened?
They just drool on both sides of their mouth. But yeah, no, it was, the thing is, because the room was so large, it just took a lot to finish it out. So really what I did, it's strange because there was if you can imagine, a bay window on the back of a house looking out into the backyard. And then the previous owner just built a cinder block garage on the back of the house, and the bay window looked into it.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess he just wanted to work on his cars or something, but then the neighbors shut him down. As you know, it can happen.
Right. If working from home in Nashville rock stars has been a thing that was considered illegal up till last year when we won the home studio battle, Save Home Studios in Music City.
God. And you know what? I have to take this opportunity to thank you profusely for heading that up.
You're welcome, man.
And making that happen.
It's my honor to be doing that.
Yeah, that was a really, for a lot of us, but certainly for me, after putting so much time and effort and money into building a studio, really scary to know that you can just be shut down, arbitrarily.
Yeah.
So
hold up, just to bring anybody who's new listening to this, to bring you up to speed, Nashville actually made it illegal back in, I think, 98 to work from home and have a customer come to your house, right? So that applied to anything, whether you were just cutting somebody's hair, whether somebody came over because you had the piano and you're going to teach somebody piano lessons, to all the recording studios, all the music that was being recorded in homes. Even somebody with a laptop and a single mic doing a hip hop track, and just recording one vocal would be considered illegal, which was nutty. And we finally fought really hard to pass a new bill in 2020. Of all years, we pulled that shit off during, the tornado.
Oh man.
And, protests and rioting and a pandemic. And we pulled
exactly.
It off.
And man, you were the king of that. And I can't thank you enough, as I'm sure a lot of studio owners here can't, because it was always, we were sort of doing these,
well, it was absurd. It's like, but don't ask, don't tell. It's like, keep your head down. How are you going to ever do anything well with music if you're keeping your head down?
You can't. I mean, it's just the climate itself,
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're all very thankful to you. So thank you, Lidge.
Well, you're welcome, man. I'm thankful to you guys for coming out and supporting. I mean, you were always there, speaking at public hearings or whatever, just being supportive of the whole thing.
Well, we had to, something had to be done. But I guess what I was going to say is it just costs so much money to outfit this cinder block shell. I decoupled the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And I put them on neoprene footers, and then I had a space in between.
Wasn't that your other band from New Orleans, Neoprene Footers?
Neoprene Footers, yes. No, it's great in Donaldson here, because just right over on Elm Hill Pike, there are all these industrial places you can get all this material you would never think you could.
Yeah.
But so I sort of had this wall built out from the cinder block wall, and then on the other side of that, I had 2 layers of sheetrock with green glue, and I had insulation in between. And here in Donaldson, we get planes coming over, but that's kind of didn't bother me, because I was like, if we have these plane's already making noise, maybe my neighbors are going to be less apt to notice, that I'm making noise.
Yeah. I mean, if that shows up on a recording, it's just going to sound like a hit, like the Beatles back in the USSR.
Exactly.
Give me a break. Who doesn't want a plane on the record?
Exactly. But luckily, I built it so well that you can't even hear the planes in there.
That's cool. So just to clarify a little bit of the studio build thing, similar, I started with a concrete shell, cinder block shell of a, Rockstars. If you're starting with a garage space or something, you might have just have cinder block walls. And the trick is to, if you can, put an inch gap in there and then just build a new wall inside that. And that will create an air gap between your wall and the cinder block. And it will really do a great job of cutting out sound.
Exactly. I mean, I had a consultant come over, and his name is escaping me now. I should just be able to rattle it off. But essentially, he was telling me basically the things that stop sound are mass and air, which we know. And then he just sort of said, basically, you want a sandwich of hard stuff, soft stuff, and hard stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't want like a layer in the middle, because that's known as a triple leaf effect, which allows more sound to transmit, So it's just all these things that I never really wanted to know, but I had to learn, as I'm putting these rooms together. And luckily on the bay window, I was able to take those out, and that became the control room window. So now the control room window from this larger rec room. So my control room is roughly, I don't know, it's probably, I would guess it's probably, 20, it's probably like an 18 by 18 control room. And
that's pretty good, man.
Yeah,
that's pretty big.
Exactly. And then there's a nice live room.
Although I have to comment, I'm sorry, I should be quicker on my feet. The only bummer about that would be that 18 by 18 is a square, and a square and a cube are going to be the toughest sizes,
It initially wasn't that. It was because I put a piano booth sort of in another area of the back of the control room. So initially it was sort of this otter shape. But
shaped like an otter. I love it.
Shaped like an otter. Yes, exactly. But, sort of, necessity dictated that, to get the piano sort of where it needed to be, or where it was possible,
Cool.
But yeah, it's that's the build. And then I was lucky enough to, if you remember 16 Ton, that studio, it was going out of business, unfortunately. And it was about to become a hair salon the day before I bought the two big, sort of soundproof doors like they have in Blackbird.
Oh, cool. You got pro soundproof doors.
I did. I was very, very lucky there. And then I also got the glass, for at least the bigger glass from 16 Ton for the control room, the sort of laminated glass. So it's been quite an endeavor, but I'm really glad it's finally, just sort of dialed in and ready to go.
Right on, man. I'm a huge fan of using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice right now in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the new subscription options. For only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Envoy Pro Electron is the fastest, toughest, mini-sized, universal portable USB-C SSD that lets you record from anywhere in the galaxy with confidence. With speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second real-world performance, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Never worry about the storage and safety of your work again. Find the new OWC Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Wes Little, joining us from his studio, Coupe de Ville, here in Donaldson. Right. Donaldson is kind of Nashville, it's the same jam.
Yeah, pretty much.
So you ready to jam, dude?
Always. Yeah,
jamming is kind of important. In fact, if I jam in my studio, I usually try and sneak onto the drum kit before anybody else does.
Yeah. Drums are fun. Let's face it.
Drums are super fun until I get to the fill. And then it's not fun when I fall apart and all of a sudden my kick, I forget which leg is which hand. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Well, I can tell you as a drummer that can happen to drummers as well.
So let's talk about that. Let's jump right in and talk about fills for just a second.
Sure.
Here you go. Talk about the role of drum fills in a song arrangement, for example. How much is too little or too much? And what do different drum fills say about the next section of a song that's coming up?
Well, I think you bring up a very good point. I mean, essentially, as a drummer, and certainly as a drummer in the studio, where we're quite honestly making a record, it's going to be preserved of something you're doing. You want to make as good of a choice as you can. And basically, I had a producer tell me once, it was actually this guy that I knew in New York who ended up being the MD for Public Enemy, but he also did a lot of independent producing of different projects. Mm-hmm. And he said something one time that really stuck with me. He said, a drummer really makes the transitions of a song happen. And you do that obviously with fills, but with dynamics, with the color of sounds that you're going to use. So that always stuck with me. And I think that's when I think about a fill, I'm like, looking forward to where we're going in the next section of the song, what will be a fill that will serve that purpose to get us from point A to point B, to sort of act as like, I guess it would be sort of like making it seamless, Right. So I think that's sort of the thought that's going through my head. And then another thought in terms of my instincts about it is how, in making that transition, what's the energy between the two sections of the song, So that plays into how I play, if I play simply or if I play in a more complicated way. What am I setting up? What's coming next? And I think the question of simplicity versus complexity is all about the song, or the piece of music that you're playing. Yeah. So if you've got something, obviously that's sort of like in a more frenetic jazz vein, it might be a opportunity for you to play something busy and sort of make the transition happen that way. But often in those cases, the drums are acting as as much of a sort of featured role as they are in a supporting role. So I think that's another thing you have to consider too. Like, is this a place where the drums are featured, or is this a place where the drums are supporting what's going on around them? And typically with pop music, rock music, country music, the stuff that we have a lot of in Nashville, the drums are in a supporting role, but they have their moments when they can sort of pop out, in Nashville as the drums are often in a more supportive role.
Yeah.
But there are times for them to be featured, like in a fill or whatever, and they can really pop out and, make a statement and then just sort of tuck back in. But I think for me, it's all, it's song dependent, it's energy dependent, and it's all about the transition of getting from one song to another, one section to another.
Yeah. I mean, would you agree that typically in a pop one, if we're talking about rock meets pop, that kind of thing, songwriter, high energy, there's guitars in there, there's maybe some distortion or not, but that the fills, there might be a tendency for the fills to develop and elevate along with the song. If there's going to be a double chorus and an outro in the end, you maybe need to save the bigger fill for a little later in the song than giving it all away on the first chorus, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all about economy, so that something can grow,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I guess what I'm saying is just within that context of, having sort of this, you're going up to this apex of the song and then coming back down, however you choose to do that. It's about thinking about the energy and flow and how to connect those sections together.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by times when a drummer might choose a fill that is a cool fill, but my gut tells me that this is somehow it's stopping us in the groove in that moment, as opposed to just like, sometimes I find myself just suggesting, like, what about just a da 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 da,
exactly,
just go straight forward, like keep us moving,
Well, and I think that's one thing that I've always tried to focus on in my internally is like, is this going to bust up the groove? Because I've tried to be, even when playing complex music, even when playing fills in complex music, or playing a lot of notes or just a few notes, I always want to have a sense of the groove and that there's something that isn't breaking up that momentum or forward motion or groove or what have you. So I totally agree. And I think that's, that's a question of instinct and experience and just, sometimes it's just about maturity as a musician, Often drummers, because we are holding down the fort, we're playing the groove if we're doing our job right,
Mm-hmm.
And then there comes this moment when we can do something. And then it becomes a question of, do I try to do this thing that I've been practicing that, I think will be cool, and then try to force it on that area of the song. And I don't think that works. I think you just practice and you develop a lot of different elements of your vocabulary of fills. And then, when you are in the moment in the song, you pull from that, but hopefully in the tasteful way that you should to make all those things happen. The song grow, the sections connect, the energy go to where it needs to go.
Yeah. I mean, or you could be like, who played drums on Hotel California? It was
Don Henley.
Yeah, Don Henley played. And like I noticed, I remember when I listened to that song later, I was like, shit, man, he's doing a fill like every bar at the end of the song.
Exactly.
It was really awesome. And it worked, it was funny.
It does. And I mean, like, I think, the magic of simplicity is always great. That being said, just something being simple doesn't necessarily make it magic. I think it's just all about keeping your ears and your heart sort of tuned to the song, and finding these moments to do something that's cool but doesn't break things up.
Yeah, and it's like anything else. It's like swearing, right? If you do it all the time, then the words don't have any weight anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and it almost becomes a crutch as opposed to an emphasis. You know?
If you do it too much, then you can't stop doing it. It's like
pretty much.
It's like something else that I won't mention. When you're like 13 and you first start playing drums.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm thinking of the Saturday Night Live episode with the elf on a shelf, where where he starts confiding that he's like, he's having to watch the kid. He's not enjoying it anymore. I'll leave that one there, rock stars.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to pivot away from that for just a sec. From Phil's, let's talk about the same thing regarding cymbals. So these are all I like asking the dumb questions. I remember it's like, oh yeah, learning it's like, oh, are hi-hats in the verses and are rides in the choruses, or like, do rides happen in the bridges? What are some thoughts that you want to share about what cymbal you're supposed to play and when in a song? And then, what about crashes, Do you crash everywhere or not?
Well, I guess it depends on if you're Keith Moon. Like Keith Moon didn't have a hi-hat.
Nice.
So he just would play cymbals all the time. Everything was going to ring. And that's what it was. That's what that band was.
Yeah.
I will say often now, especially because there's so many more elements in the music, certainly programming, different rhythmic elements. Oftentimes, there's one producer I work with, and she's great. But she's definitely more about the hi-hat, just keeping it on the hi-hat. Like sometimes I'll just take the ride cymbal off the stand, just so it's not even a temptation. Then there are like rock things where, I'm playing the ride cymbal, but not with the stick tip. Instead, I'm playing it with the shoulder of the stick and getting a bigger, clangier, right? Yeah, more of a wash, clangier sound. And then there are times when I'll even play, like Ride the Crash, if it's like a big rock thing. Obviously, in rock, you're opening up the hi-hats, But I find that in a lot of music, currently, the ride, it's certainly popular music, the ride isn't used as much as maybe it once would have been, like in classic rock or what have you.
Yeah, when do you hit your China?
I've got a few, but I haven't really broken them out lately. I mean, here again, man, if done in the right way in a certain context, something can be cool. But yeah, typically the China is not happening. I've used something that sort of gets there without being as obtrusive. It's these sort of, I'm a Sabian artist. So Sabian has these cymbals called ozone, and you've probably seen them, but basically they have holes, probably about the size of 2 or 3 inch diameter holes cut out. And they sort of have a washier, darker sound that's, it's kind of like a China, but a gentler sound, more of a dark sound. You can ride it, and it's not as obtrusive.
I was just talking to JJ Blair on the podcast, and we were talking about recording Bernard Purdy, and apparently, I guess he brings a China with him, right? And so we were just joking about the China recently.
That's funny, man. Well, there's cool things you can do with it. You can make it work. It becomes part of your sound.
Yeah. What about crashes and crash placement? Like, just basic things to consider. Like, for example, you're coming up and you're about to start the verse, and maybe there's a couple of bars of music, and then the singing happens, or maybe the singing happens right on that one. Does it make more sense to hit the crash if you got those couple of bars of music, but don't hit the crash if they're about to start singing right in that moment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, what's the song? The song's the melody. In most pop music, that melody is often carried by a singer. That's, I would say, 99% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have to be aware of the vocal and that melody and try not to step on it.
As the
So
engineer, usually I actually have the very best melody, but it's in my head and I'm in the control room and they forgot to ask me what they should do.
but of course, same with a drummer.
But
No,
I can give it to you over the talkback anytime you're ready.
exactly. But yeah, man, I think it's strange. Cymbals have gotten, over the last few decades, they've gotten larger and darker and washier, which is cool. Um, for a long time they were sort of smaller and brighter. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's certainly a tonal consideration. Like, do I want a darker sounding cymbal here, or do I want? And typically lately, I've been favoring the darker sounding cymbals because they just seem to be less harsh and obtrusive, especially with digital recording and
those bright mics that people have putting on condensers on overheads.
Exactly. So I believe that that's the trend, but it's also something I've grown to prefer. Because I want a cymbal that's going to be darker and speak and, serve its role, do what it needs to do, but yet doesn't just sort of take over everything.
Yeah. What are some things that people do? Because I mean, it's not uncommon for people to joke about, cymbals being a challenge if you're a producer or an engineer. Why do you think that is? And where does that come from? What are drummers doing in the studio that is reinforcing that struggle?
Well, I think, and I've been guilty of it, and drummers in general, sometimes we're just playing too many crashes,
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you've got a big room sound. And I think it's important from an engineering standpoint. I really love it when guys dial in the room or whatever we kind of perceive the mix to maybe end up being. It helps me to get those sounds sort of dialed in. So I'm not overplaying crashes, or I'm not,
Right. You're
I'm not,
hearing where this record is, what's this going to really sound like.
yeah, like kind of what's our end game here.
What do you think
And
about parallel compression on drums? How often do you feel like that is being dialed in and you're hearing that in the headphones so that somebody's sort of making the sound really close to a final mix?
I dig it. If we think that that's the vision of where something's going to go, then I would prefer to hear it that way, because then
Yeah.
that's going to inform my playing. You know, um, Here at my place, what I've done, and this is going to sound gratuitous, but I probably have, I think it's about 16 channels of drums. Even when I'm doing like a remote session to send to a client, I think it's at least 14. But I've got 2 room mics that are far away. I've got one that's in front of the kit. I've got a stereo ribbon mic over the top of the kit, along with 2 condensers, you know. And then in addition, I have sort of 2 ribbons set up in a Glenn Johns kind of thing. And then I have the toms mic'd up, the snare bottom, uh, a couple of different mics on the kick for choices, because I'm thinking, I don't know what this vision is going to be, or this, because sometimes I'm the first or second thing to go down.
Right. So you're just trying to be ready for anything.
Exactly. So I don't want to paint anyone into a corner. I don't cut with a lot of EQ or compression. I just try to get these basic raw sounds and captured in different ways, so that then people can make the choice of what they want, you know? Um, and that's what we talked about 2020 earlier, and that's been a real saving income stream in 2020 is being able to do these remote tracks, certainly when
Yeah.
things were shut down. And, because of where we are, it still takes a while, I think, before we really sort of get back to things as we knew it in terms of just sessions and whatever, like how comfortable you feel
Mhm.
having people in a room and how many,
Mhm.
So that's certainly been a consideration too, but it's been great for me to be able to, cut these remote tracks for people and send them, really good, high quality Class A sounds. And then they can make the decision on how they want to mix them.
One of the challenges for recording your voice is getting close enough to the microphone that you get a great bass boost proximity effect without getting blasts of wind on the microphone. Try this experiment. Hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, peanut butter popcorn. Feel that blast of air on your hand? That will cause a terrible sound on your microphone called a plosive. My favorite way to avoid this is to use the Jay-Z microphone pop filter in front of a mic. This thing is built like a tank with a flexible metal arm that I can clamp directly onto the mic stand. It has a super cool waveguide design that looks like ripples on water and prevents the plosives getting through to the mic no matter how explosive the voice gets. Plus, it lets the high frequencies through for superb clarity on the mic. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 complementer in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. There was something I did want to ask you about drum fills, and I forgot to ask it, which is when somebody does the 16th note fills, the
Right.
The kick. What are you supposed to do with the kick right there? Does the kick support the quarter notes and the ones of the bar? Is that a kickless moment? There's just been a lot of times in the studio where I've noticed a drummer play through a fill, and then a moment later I'm like, "Wait, hold up, the kick just disappeared through all that," and it felt like maybe we lost power. What should we know about that?
I mean, man, here again, it for me, it depends on what's happening in that moment. Typically, when you play a crash, the kick, for the most part, is supporting it, So typically, digga, 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 psh. Okay. Now you could have the kick playing on the quarter notes underneath the snare drum, but you want to make sure or maybe you don't. Depends on, I guess, how, slick the music is supposed to be. But, are you going to have flams happening between the kick and the snare? With you playing underneath? But typically, I feel that the kick is a good way to support the crash. But here again, if there's some sort of specific musical moment or something's pulling back or you want the bottom to fall out, maybe the kick doesn't play on the one with the crash. But I would say 95% of the time, in the music I'm hearing, when I'm hearing a crash, I'm often hearing the kick with it.
Like if you heard a fill that went da 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 crash, would it be kick, kick, kick? Or would it be?
It could be, but here again, because of where the kick is mixed, typically in music, I probably would be less inclined to play it underneath the snare drum, unless it was like a build up, or something where I'm playing quarters or eighths exactly on the kick, and then that's sort of going along with it. But the kick can take up so much sonic space, especially in a final mix. At least I don't want it in certain types of music to get too busy. But if it were like a Motown type thing with a tighter 20-inch kick, then perhaps it works with it underneath. You know what I mean? And that's where, we're talking about the room, we're talking about the drums, we're talking about the song, we're talking about all these elements that are coalescing, and then we're making a decision on what makes that moment happen.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be non-committal. I would say typically, if I'm having a larger kick drum with a larger sound, I'm probably like, let's say a Bonham 26-inch kick. You don't want to play a ton of notes on that because it's going to take up a lot of space. Now, granted, he did, in these
I'm glad you
brought
him up because I wanted to talk about that for just a
minute.
Sure,
absolutely. But I'm just saying, if you get too much going on that kind of kick, as an engineer, certainly mixing, then you're going to have to ride that kick in a certain way, and you may not be able to get it up in the mix because there's just so much of it.
So recently I got turned back onto Led Zeppelin 4. I don't remember why it came up on my radar. Somebody was talking about it, and I just went to go listen to the record again. And I was listening to Black Dog.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Which is just like, that's one of those classic, if you want to show people how to play drums, you might start playing that one, right?
Right.
And first thing I was struck by was the kick wasn't in any of the places my brain might have thought it was going to be, and I think that's the thing about John Bonham's playing too, right? Is he did some unexpected stuff with his drum parts. So do you have anything you want to say about just the way he might approach a kick drum, or any of the ways we're thinking about it? Or am I just making up a bunch of bullshit based on listening to one track?
I think absolutely. The thing about Bonham, it was a very, especially for the time, a very unique thing. And it was a unique miking technique. Here again, we sort of have the Glenn Johns or recording in a stairwell. To get that drum sound, it's a lot about the size of the drums, the way John was playing them, and the room in which they were recorded.
Yeah.
It's not really about a ton of mics, because people will be like, well, how do you get that sound? It's like, well, it's the room, man. And it's the drummer in the room.
Yeah.
And it's the drummer knowing how to play to the room. That
was probably the Glenn Johns miking sound anyway, right?
Yeah. And so,
I think I hope I'm correct. Was that Glenn?
It is. Yeah.
It's for.
I don't know if it was like each record was done exactly that way, but I think that was the predominant go-to. And then they would have like a mic in front of the kick, but he had a full head. So the mic wasn't going in.
Oops, sorry. Andy Johns. Just Googled it. Sorry, my bad.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, totally.
We both stand corrected there.
Thank God for Google.
Yeah, I'm glad we got that cleared up. Drop a marker there.
No. We'll just leave that one live. Rockstars know they already know that I'm researching in real time. I'm real proud of it these days.
Beautiful. I love it. So that type of miking technique is basically, we're capturing the sound of the room and the drums in the room, as opposed to having mics right on the drum.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you get this big sound from. But, here again, you have to dial that in and have the vision of how it's going to be mixed, because you're not going to have a ton of choices. in terms of separating the drums out.
Yeah, that is your sound. You're not going to
Yeah, which I think is awesome, but I certainly the thing that always stuck out to me about Bonham is there was still this underlying soulful groove in this rock environment, and they were, of course, heavily influenced by blues and R&B, but, that's what I hear come across, and it's sort of this groovy sort of fluid thing that's going on with these big sources of sound,
and something that's different about it, because I feel like, coming up as an engineer or producer, I got caught up in all the things that we get focused on and caught up. Like, that snare sounds a little weaker than the other one. Let's copy and paste something in Pro Tools to make it sound strong there. Or, you discover, not working with a drummer like yourself, I'm sure, but, you discover beat detective and you discover all these things to manipulate. But in the back of your brain, you're thinking like, I just want it to sound as rock and roll as Led Zeppelin. And then you go listen to Led Zeppelin and you're like, oh shit, he's not playing the same thing twice in any given moment.
He's not, and it flows well, it's grooving, but it's not necessarily by any means gridded out.
Yeah, no, not even close, right?
So, I did an experiment one time. One of my favorite drummers is Zigaboo Modeles from the Meters.
Yep. Yeah, we were just talking about him on the last show too.
Exactly. Well, he's, obviously just killing it on those records. But, if you try to put that out to a grid, because I did it, I took a little break and I beat detected, I used beat detective to sort of like clean it up and put it on a grid. And it wasn't nearly as good.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is not happening, So I think those little push me, pull you moments in the right place essentially create the groove. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that within the context of a click or what have you. But I think a lot of these things like beat detective and the grid and where it is, they can certainly sterilize a groove if you're not careful.
Yeah, and I want to circle back and ask you a question about that. But before we leave Black Dog, I have one last comment that
Sure.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on too, if there's any thoughts to really share about it. It got to the end and the credits rolled, and I noticed that John was not credited as one of the songwriters, and I was just like, "What?"
Yeah,
I just couldn't believe it. I was so struck by that. I went and posted on Facebook, and everybody jumped in, and of course, you get the wonderful back and forth where. Pretty much everybody who answered was smarter than me, but they, made comments about like, that's not considered copyright or it is, or it should be. And, I guess my brief description or understanding of it is that the rhythm is, melody and chord progressions are considered the essence of song copyright. And
right.
I don't mean to put you on the spot as an expert on any of this, but what thoughts do you have of that? You're a drummer. You appreciate the contribution of the drums. I can't imagine Black Dog without John Bonham's drums.
Well, and that's what I think that's where we have to go with it. I think, yes, in the Tin Pan Alley version of music, it's the lead sheet we're talking about.
Right. But of course, we just described that you can write down the drum part too.
Exactly. But this is sort of the conception that's come up through the years that the copyright belongs to those who came up with the melody and the chords. And typically it's the ones that come up with the melody. And I think what we're not considering here from a drummer standpoint is that groove is a melody.
Yeah.
That groove is a melody. The combination of those sounds are a foundation of harmony. It's just not one that we traditionally consider it to be.
It's a little less easy to quantify too.
It is, but
a lot easier to write a melody, a series of melodic notes up onto a staff paper.
Right. But the thing is, and especially where music is going today and has gone, you might have a chord progression with a 1 chord, a 6 chord, a 4 and a 5, or some variant thereof. And then you might have somebody sort of, yeah, they might sing a hook on a chorus, but they also might sort of have sort of a more just static rhythmic thing, rap thing happening and like on a verse. Like let's say it's sort of a pop country song. Then a lot of the things that are making that song happen are the parts coming in and out that aren't necessarily parts of those equations. You know, you've got different guitar hooks and stuff that's happening. You've got different effects coming from either programming or keyboard world or whatever. And obviously you have this drum groove happening, you know? So, I mean, I understand it. And I think I think we could safely say that Black Dog or The Ocean or any of these Led Zeppelin songs would not be what they are without John Bonham.
Yeah, and I think somebody mentioned that he might be credited on certain ones, but that just struck me. I just was so shocked when I saw that.
Yeah, I mean,
and it probably brings up a bigger topic, which is if we're using an older system and we want to recognize a different kind of thing, it may just be that's where we need to go. Is we just need a way of acknowledging all the contributions that go into making what we do, because we know this from the studio. We know that it's like everybody down to the intern who's in the room with us is part of that process of making something happen in that moment.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you think about like, is it Tom Dowd, The Language of Music?
Yeah.
So, he's the one suggesting Ginger Baker play this, on Sunshine of Your Love. And then that becomes like essentially the drum hook and something that informs the rest of the song. Yeah. It's independent, and that came from the quote unquote engineer. But that obviously had a huge influence on the song that was independent of melody and harmony, So did he get writing credit? I don't think so.
So Rockstars, if you're watching this, you might be listening. Maybe you're checking it out on YouTube or somewhere like that. If there's a comment box below, drop in a comment and let us know, what are your thoughts on how the drums should be included in this stuff? Is it strictly about the recording, the performance? Should it be, part of the songwriting? Are we just misinterpreting? Are we giving too much value to the songwriting in this discussion? And putting too much weight on that and the definition. Yeah.
And I also want to say, he was part of the band, which I think is a different metric than, being a hired session player.
Sure. Well, if we're hired for anything, we're hired.
Exactly.
Period, Rockstars, I am super excited to announce that I'm doing a full studio remodeling here at the Toy Box Studio, headquarters of Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm working with the amazing studio designer Carl Tatz to upgrade my control room to a Phantom Focus mix room, and have also been improving the sound of my entire studio room by room. The first time I heard one of Carl's Phantom Focus mix rooms featuring the PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It felt like I was listening to three-dimensional sound where I could close my eyes and reach out and touch the instruments with crystal clear bass radiating from a 50-foot wall of pure marble. It was by far the best sounding mix room monitors I have ever heard anywhere. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatz.com/mixroom-mentor. Let's spin that back around. You were talking about the subtleties of the groove and stuff like that. And there's a video that I put in the YouTube playlist where you're teaching a clinic and you start showing a groove and you start playing it slightly different and you can feel it, but it's very subtle. And you talked about, finding this pocket that's halfway between a straight and a swung groove with just a hi-hat, kick, and snare. And I wonder if you want to just talk more about that topic and the importance of like finding those pockets like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I put on the Spotify playlist. I don't know if that'll be part of the, there's a song I did with Robben Ford called Stone Cold Heaven.
Nice.
And it's basically just, you're pretty much on a one chord the whole time, and obviously he's singing and their parts coming in and out, but it, we wanted to get sort of this lilt, because, if it's just a one chord and it's going on and there's not some sort of elasticity and magic happening, it just isn't going to translate in the same way. And I remember Robben was very happy with that.
And that's with Tyler Bryant. I just found out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, he was on there. Tyler was just on the podcast before.
Oh, nice.
Before we did this interview. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. So when we were in the studio, this was before Tyler's parts, I guess, had gone down. But I wanted to sort of make this it's sort of it's some people might call it a scuffle, but it's somewhere between a straight eighth note thing and a shuffle. And it sort of imparts this different vibe to it, which I've always liked it when I heard grooves like that, that just sort of have this special lope to them, that just adds this element of groove that if you just played it sort of straight or shuffled, it wouldn't have the same effect,
Now, what about the triplet? Something that's a triplet feel versus a swing feel. I feel like that was a thing I had to discover along the way too.
Well, I think, swing feel, at least in terms of a jazz kind of conception, is all about where you're placing notes on the ride and how you're playing them. And, this sort of goes back to the kick drum. Like some jazz musicians will play the ride cymbal and they'll play the swing pattern, ding-a-ding, 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 and they'll feather with the kick.
Well, was that meant to be a good sounding ride, or were you using that as sort of lackluster the way you sang it? I was like, I wasn't sure.
That's the best one my mouth can produce at this point.
It's great.
But yeah, I mean, if you've got that swing pattern happening, like even some jazz players will play very lightly with the kick drum on all quarters to sort of give the ride this cushion. So it's sort of not out there by itself, but just almost indistinguishable. And they call it feathering. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a placement of those notes that, although it's based on a triplet pattern, it's not always necessarily an exact triplet. It might be a little wider than a triplet would be.
And then maybe push it towards swing, right?
Yeah. But you don't want it to be too wide where it starts to feel stiff. So, and typically it's more about this forward motion and a bounce. So there's when I'm talking about swing, as opposed to a triplet thing like a shuffle or 12/8 or what have you, which is more sort of gridded out. Like if we were to say it was on the grid of Pro Tools, it would be more so lining up with the triplet eighth note.
Yeah.
But with swing, it can be a little wider, or, it just, and obviously it can be a little more narrow the faster you go. So if it's a really fast swing pattern, it would almost sound unnatural and too stiff if it was exactly on that triplet grid.
Yeah. It's funny because I get really excited about drums. I get really excited about talking about drums and grooves and everything. But I realized as we're going into this, I don't know how to talk about drums on a podcast. I'm not sure how you talk about grooves. I feel like for me, it's like you play me something and we go like, oh, listen to that. That's so great, But it's cool to hear you talking about it.
Well, thank you. And I think it's, I dig it too. And obviously it's a topic I can go on and on about, but I think, it's important to, it's a very subtle thing,
Yeah.
The same teacher I had for my undergrad used to say, the bass is the time and the drums color the time, at least in a jazz sense. And I always thought that was pretty interesting. It's like where the drums are placing certain things uh, sort of change the background of groove as the bass is sort of working like a clock. Now, I've since come to say, well, it's a little more of a relationship than that. Like depends on where the bass player is putting it, where I will put it on the drums in terms of pocket.
Let's talk about that a little bit. What are thoughts that we want to have about when something should be ahead and what the effect is versus something that should be behind? And, I think about experiences with bands in the studio where the feel is right when that guitar player who's way on top is not corrected, and it's just like
right,
yanking the band along.
right.
But then you've also got the Questlove, D'Angelo kind of like way behind the beat approach to things that just does incredible stuff to a pocket too.
Yeah, man. It's sort here again. I think you kind of hit it on the nail on the head there, which is it is style dependent. If you're talking about the D'Angelo kind of thing, the bass is often pretty far behind, but Questlove is kind of playing it pretty straight on the beat. It doesn't mean it's a straight groove or that it's lacking any sort of like groove character.
Didn't he talk though about I thought I remembered hearing him talk about having to learn how to play the hi-hat behind the snare or something like that.
Exactly. So when you got the kick and the snare happening, then he's like relaxing the hi-hat to sort of go along with what the bass and other elements are doing.
Interesting. All right.
So yeah, I mean there is but I guess what I'm saying is that the sort of the kick and the snare are typical, because here's what will happen. Especially if click is there. I mean, that's one thing. But if you're playing it live, if a bass player starts pulling back and I pull back with him, we're going to drag. I have to at least keep it on the beat or a little ahead of the beat to create that pocket. And that relationship, I mean, we can both play right on it. The bass player plays a little ahead, I might play behind. Or vice versa, but that's sort of the creation of the pocket. And I think certainly with programming and digital recording and these abilities we have now to manipulate grooves and patterns, you can come up with like a lot of crazy, interesting stuff that is sort of like, it is a loop, but it not in a sense you may think. It may, I guess what I'm saying is there's consistency within that pattern at some point, and it comes back to the starting point of where it was.
How do you feel like, computerized grids and that introduction of that way of creating music has either helped or hurt groove and our collective interpretation of groove and music?
Well, I mean, I understand how it came about, and I think in some applications it can make things sound really huge and really tight and consistent, to sort of edit everything up. But so much of the music that people keep coming back to even now, or they're like, man, I really like this, or I really like the sound of that. It wasn't created in those ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm not by any means condemning it, because I think it can sound really cool to have these things sort of tightened up and all playing together. And obviously, if you got a lot of flams going along with programming, my goal is to try to play along with it so that we don't need to do that. But I'm fully aware that with all these elements, that sometimes it has to be done. That being said, some of this, and this sort of relates to the scuffle or this sort of in-between thing you're talking, is it swing, is it a shuffle? That is something that, I mean, it still can be done within a DAW, but it's also something that's a human element that I think attracts the ear.
Right.
It's sort of this not sort of totally predictable consistency.
Yeah. Have you noticed the sort of slippery slope of if you line something up, then all of a sudden everything else starts feeling like it needs to get lined up on a
Absolutely.
session, and next thing you know, you just end up
Absolutely.
with like everything's right
Yeah,
on a grid and nothing feels great anymore.
exactly. And I think, that also goes for vocal tuning. Sometimes you're tuning a
Yeah.
vocal and you may get this one note that was out, but then you're realizing, okay, now these other two notes that were in relationship to it, now they sound wrong. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, it is the slippery slope of tightening the grid. Once you square up this corner in the frame, the other corners are now out.
How often do you find yourself editing things where you and do you have a way of editing where you don't rely on the grid for the edit?
I typically rely on my ears first,
Hmm.
but you know, it's mainly for endings or maybe something where we've had a retard or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, I'll maybe look at what what instrument seems to hit it where it needs to be. And of course, it's a lot easier to take out space than it is to add space
Right.
in those conditions. So, um, that's kind of where I do that. I mean, like if there's one or two notes that are where I'm hearing a flam or something's not as solid, yeah, I'll just sort of edit those and shift them a little bit to make them where they need to be. But typically, I edit to the drums as opposed to edit to other instruments.
Yeah. One of the tricks that I learned, I think I learned this from Brad Jones early on,
Oh
was
yeah, I did a record with him. He's
yeah.
great.
So he taught me a lot about engineering at Alex the Great is where I started out. But it was, in Pro Tools, the down arrow drops the beginning of a selection and the up arrow drops the end of a selection. So what I've learned how to do is, or what I do a lot, and it's also much, much faster, is let's say there's some bar of drums or there's a bass part that got clammed and I need to do a fix. I go to the spot where it is and I tap in real time on the down arrow and then grab that beginning of the selection and start tapping up on the up arrow until I get to the end of the selection and then just hit copy and I can just go straight to the next. Actually, if the error happens after that, you can even let Pro Tools just keep rolling and then just tap in the downbeat of where you need to
Oh
replace the
wow,
note, hit paste.
yeah,
And then the next trick is if you've got an extended keyboard, the number one on the number pad over there, number 1 and 2. 1 is rewind, 2 is fast forward. Or if you just hit 1 like 1, 2, 3 times, it'll just
right,
simply jump back a few and you just hit
cool.
space and like, man, you're playing your finished fix already.
That's awesome.
But
I got to try that.
yeah, it's fun I really enjoy working in ways like that where you don't get so stuck on like zooming in with your nerd glasses, looking for the grid
Exactly.
lines.
Well, and Brad, when we did the record over there, I don't even think we cut to click.
There you
So,
go. You went straight to my next question. Are you ready for it?
oh sure, yeah.
To click or not to click?
It all depends here again, man, on the vibe we're going for. Like some of these records I've done with Robben, some tunes we haven't played to click, uh, and some we have. I think for sake of editing, it is easier if we're using playlists. If
Right.
we're cutting to click, obviously. But we did one record,
Unless you work with me because I can make anything happen in the
well, which is
studio.
awesome, and that's sort of like Brad too. Um, so if someone has those skills, then yeah, I think.
I'm joking, but I'm not
Oh,
joking.
really?
I'm not joking.
no, no, I would imagine if you work with him, and we're a protege of some sort, then yeah, you've got those skills for sure.
Want to know how to record killer drums in your studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from Nashville session drummers in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro mix that won't take years to learn, Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of a great mix, then register for my free course, Mixmaster Bundle, to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. Get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR to get 10% off any course in the Academy for a limited time. I definitely learned a lot of cool stuff from Brad and Rob.
Oh yeah,
and you're referring to Robben Ford, but Robin Eaton is Brad's studio partner, who was also a mentor for me.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I was talking about doing the records with Robin, but I will say we did one record. I think it was the first record I did with him, called A Day in Nashville, and we recorded 10 songs in one day.
Oh, that's
it
great.
was supposed to originally be a record where we actually had a live audience and we were just playing for them and they would film it. But Robin, something happened to his wrist. He had some sort of fracture. I don't know if he had fallen or what had happened.
Ouch.
So we had to move the date of the record back, and then we just did it as a traditional studio record. The problem was the studio we were at, which will remain nameless,
it was not the Toy Box Studio, Rockstars.
No, it would definitely, and it wasn't Coupe de Ville.
It wasn't Coupe de Ville.
But there was an intermittent problem with some of the channels and on the drums. So,
actually, it might have been the Toy Box then.
No, I'm sure it wasn't, because this was pronounced. But it affected one of the overheads, so there was no way to make this record work without overheads. So what I had to do is go back in and cut all the drums again by myself. Yeah. And we did that obviously at another studio. And it was cool, but what ended up happening is these songs we hadn't cut to click, I had to put a hi-hat or something in the mix of what I had played, to have some sort of reference point. So I mean,
and that's a cool trick. I've done that before too. It's like you can create your own click track. It doesn't have to come from a computer. You just need something that tells you what to do next in the next moment.
Exactly. And I think it's sort of like building the mix, and having the vision for where you're going to end up. If you know where you're going to end up, and that this is the take, and that this is what you want, and this is the vision, and you want this sort of elasticity in the tempo, then I think, it's cool. You don't have to cut with click. I think if you want to have playlists and edits and an easier time of that, or you may want to replace something later or what have you, then the click can also be advantageous, But here again, I don't, I think they both can be cool ways to make a record.
So one of the tracks with Robben Ford is called What I Haven't Done. And you do this great ghost notey shuffle snare thing. It's almost, I don't think it's the Purdy shuffle, but it's in that ballpark, And I wondered if you remember the song and can talk about it, great. If I'm putting you on the spot, don't sweat it. And just maybe talk about what it means to ghost note, maybe how to do that well, or how to capture it well in the studio. Where are places that we're going to screw that up? And is all that just coming from your left hand?
It depends, man. I mean, I will say that with ghost notes, it's obviously about a sonic and a dynamic thing. So I went to see a clinic with Steve Jordan, also one of my favorites, here in Nashville. And I just got to see him sort of playing the drum. And I noticed the way where he was putting the ghost notes on this way he was dealing with it. And they were sort of in the center of the head. And then he was rim shotting off to the side and the rim. And I just thought, well, I never thought of doing it that way. I'd always done it the other way, which is common, which is your rim shotting more so in the center and the ghost notes are off more so to closer to the rim.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what makes that thing happen is the blend of the ghost notes with the hi-hat, and the dynamic and timbre of them, So I think that's sort of
it creates a whole subdivision, right?
It does, yeah. And it's about this blend.
Now, is that, if you're going to ghost note, does that have to be a traditional grip, or can you?
No.
What's the other one called? Just straight grip?
It's called matched.
Matched.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's just about the sound that you're going to get from the drum, whatever grip you're using. I mean, certain things may lay in a way that's a little more easier if you're playing traditional grip. But it's funny, Steve Gadd played traditional grip forever. And I've seen a couple things with him lately where he's been playing more matched grip, So I just think it's about what lays right. For me, I was playing traditional grip when I was doing the jazz thing, and I had been in drumline, and that was also a thing. And then I got into an R&B band where I needed to play harder,
So traditional grip is good for quieter stuff, typically, like, because you're not powering down on the snare hit in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, that said, there's some traditional grip players that, like, look at Stuart Copeland. He killed it.
Yeah,
he was playing traditional grip. Now, he also had to tape up his thumb to keep the stick in there.
I did. When I play drums, when the fill comes around, somebody's going to lose an eye. That's all I'm going to say about my sticks.
Well, I mean, the thing is, traditional grip came about because colonial drummers, or whomever, I guess, drummers in the army, whatever army going however far back, they didn't have the drum in front of them. It was called a side drum. And so it made sense because the drum was off to their side for their right hand to be matched and their left hand to be in traditional grip.
Right. Can you describe for the rock stars what the grip looks like in case this is new to them?
Essentially, the traditional grip is where the stick sort of threads through. It's almost like you would be writing with a pencil.
Yeah, and the palm of your hand is sort of facing up when you're playing.
Yeah, it's facing sideways if you're doing it correctly. If it's facing up, they used to call that your catching rain.
That's me.
Yeah, exactly. So keeping it in sort of that where it's like you're going to shake someone's hand, that's the position of the hand. And so the stick is, it's like you would see in a marching band typically. It looks cool, to have a bunch of drummers in a line with traditional grip. And it made sense, certainly with the side drum. Now, that being said, there are a lot of master players, Vinnie Colaiuta, Steve Gadd, all these guys that played traditional for years, and Buddy Rich sounded amazing. And there is a definite, I think in some ways, because it's not probably the way you would naturally pick up a drumstick, there's some development in the left hand that happens that might not otherwise happen.
Yeah, you forgot to mention Papa Joe Jones, dude.
Oh, of course. Elvin Jones, all Tony Williams, all the jazz drummers, Jack DeJohnette, Roy Haynes, they all played traditional grip. So it is easier to control the stick in some ways to play lighter. And it can also have a lot of power. I guess what I'm saying is, when you pick up a drumstick, you don't typically pick it up that way.
No, but that's fascinating. You just explained where it came from. That was awesome.
It came. My understanding is it would have come from the side drum. Marching drummers, before the drum could be in front of you, it was off to your side.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, dig it, man. Well, we are, believe it or not, I hate to say it, but we are at the end of our podcast interview.
Well, man.
And but I do have one more question for you. But you go.
Sure.
You go first.
I was just saying, man, it's been my pleasure. It's been great talking with you, Lidge, and spending this time. And thank you so much for having me on Recording Studio Rockstars.
Yes. Well, I'm going to make you say thanks one more time too, because we'll be done in one sec, but
Okay.
you're welcome. So this is the same question I like to ask at the end of the show. It's a hypothetical question. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You go back and find young Wes, who is, you know, just learned about traditional grip or something, you know, and
Right.
you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice before you ship your homemade drum booth all the way across the country. You know, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could, if you just rewound the clock?
Oh, man.
That's it? You just go and say, oh, man?
Yeah, it's, oh, man. No, dude. Yeah, I think I would tell myself, you know,
No, I like it, man. More space, more silence.
more space,
in
more
the
silence. Yeah,
groove.
this is a hard question. I mean, it really is.
This is
I think
hard, man. Come on.
it's hard. Music is hard, man. I think I would probably tell myself, you know, trust your ears, trust your instincts, trust your heart, and be yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would say. Okay, this is talking point one. Talking point two is, with that, do your homework, be prepared, work hard. You know it's not going to be easy at times, and you're going to have to power through.
But still don't bounce the beater on the kick, right?
Don't bounce the beater on the kid. Yeah, that's that. No one really wants that unintentionally, for sure. But yeah, that's I think that's what I would say. You know, and strive to have your own voice. You know, because you know, with YouTube and all these resources today, someone can literally sound like someone else pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm gonna support you even more on that. I'm gonna say you don't even need to strive to have your own voice. You already have your own voice.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah,
I mean, like we all do. Like just let it do its thing.
Exactly, because I think that's really where the magic happens. You know.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about that your own voice thing, I get really struck by it, because the idea that like we already have the most incredible voice. And I don't mean literally coming out of your mouth. It could be your instrument. It could be whatever you do.
Sure.
That all you have to do is just let it speak, you know, in the best way.
And build the skills to be able to let it do that, you know?
Yeah, build the skills so you don't need that click track.
Exactly.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks so much for hanging with us on Recording Studio Rockstars. What an awesome jam. Let the Rockstars know how they can find you online. Where can they go? Man, they need a killer drum part for their next record. Where should they go?
Well, the best way you can find me online at weslittle.com, and there should be links. And still there, you know, on Instagram, it's Wes Little Drums _ Wes Love, which is sort of a joke on
Nice.
Questlove. I was going to change it to Wes Love totally, but I figured that might be too confusing. But it's Wes Little Drums _ Wes Love. And Facebook, I'm just Wes Little. And those are all ways you can get in contact with me. And, you know, I'm certainly doing a lot of remote tracks. So if anybody needs drum tracks, obviously would love to do it. Or, you know, it is a full service studio, but like so many in town. So if somebody needs that as well, it's available.
Awesome.
And Lidge, I have to thank you so much for doing this and for having me on. It's been a pleasure. And again, I still owe you many, many thanks, as we all do in Nashville, for spearheading and bringing to fruition the home studio bill.
Dude, it was my pleasure, and it was an absolute honor to be able to do that. In fact, just today earlier, the Beacon Center had stopped by and they said they had a gift for me, and they gave me this incredible glass award that said it was like their unsung hero award for 2020, and I was just like, man,
oh, beautiful.
So
well, man, you definitely were our hero, man, in that regard for 2020. Because
yeah, well,
that
thanks,
that would
man.
I think that was about the best thing in terms of government that I saw happen
Right,
in
yeah, no doubt.
2020 with everything going on. Just
It
that
was
was
fun to win something, right?
exactly. It was a win. That was
Yeah.
good.
Well, groovy, dude. Well, thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you around the studio.
Likewise, Lidge.
All
Take
right,
care,
man.
man.
Talk soon. Cheers.
See you then. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free trial subscription to get access to all their plugins. Or use the coupon ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off the pop filter for a limited time. And don't forget to learn how to get your monitoring just right at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. And finally, use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. We'll include all these links in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.